Welcome to the Lazy CEO Podcast, where Jim Schlexer, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. I'm Jim Schlexer, founder of the CEO Project. I really appreciate you coming. Today, we've got some fun with a long-term member of the CEO Project and a friend of mine, Dave Warren. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. So Dave is a serial entrepreneur. He started up and owned a couple of different businesses, but he's kind of a student of business, a business geek, if you will. This is the guy that needed to go see Warren Buffett at the annual conference just because, you know, that's Woodstock for business people. So Dave really appreciates business as much as I do. So we always enjoy talking to each other, and hopefully we'll hit some interesting topics today. I want to start, Dave, with your first business that you started. I think Energy Oil Alloys was your first, okay. So Energy Alloys, tell us a little bit about that business and why you started that business versus any other business you might get into.
Well, it's interesting. So from the time that I graduated from LSU, I was looking for a business to buy. I managed a bookstore. It was one of the first super-sized bookstores before Borders and some of the other ones. And the day I graduated, I found a partner and tried to buy it, and realized pretty quick that, you know, with the best of intentions, if you didn't have a little capital, it was tough to put a deal together. But ever since then, I'd kept looking for a business to buy. We looked at a lot of different things. I got in the oil field, contrary to my dad's advice, who was also a 40-year career oilist, if you will. And he, you know, his advice was, whatever you do, don't get into this dang business. And of course, like every good son, I just ignored him and got into it. And
this is like my lawyer friends would tell your kids, whatever they do, don't become lawyers. I'm like, exactly. But you are one. They go, yeah, it's too late for me, but you can.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's what you've seen and what you grew up with. So anyway, got into the oil field, started out in field service, but always looking for something to do. Got into manufacturing, got into distribution. And in '95, I was working for a company, and they were in steel distribution, and went to them and said, I think there's a different way to structure this business. At the time, it was very transactional. And this was during, you know, it wasn't new thinking by any means, but this is when, you know, the Japanese were coming out with Kanban, and the partnering was a big buzzword. And I said, I think there's a different way to put supply chains in place other than this transactional model that everybody's been using. And so I actually went to the owners of that business and said, what do you think? And they said, we like what we're doing. And I said, well, I feel compelled to try this. And so I started it with a partner, actually two partners. We started, you know, at the time, I remember designing the fax form. We were using faxes then, and designing the invoices, and it was just us. And so we just started doing what we did, just servicing the heck out of customers and providing solutions. And they knew they could come to us with issues or problems or things that they were trying to solve, and we would generally come up with an answer. We kept investing in the business. We got up to about $70 million in revenue over I think it was about an 8 or 9 year period. And then at the time, there was a lot of talk about the oil industry was not going to be a domestic industry anymore. This is before the shale plays. And so we figured we either needed to be a really good, small, you know, regional, or we needed to really expand the business and go global. So over about a period of, 24 months, we did 2 acquisitions, one in the US and one in, we actually bought a UK subsidiary of a French conglomerate. And we tripled the size of the business. Each one of those was doing about 70 million in revenue. And we basically put together a global footprint and we looked at kind of the geographies, the products, and the customers, and we did like a 3-dimensional matrix on what do we want the acquisitions to solve for. And by the time we finished that 24-month period, we had solved for most of what we wanted as far as what our vision was on how to service the market. So our business model was, there was a lot of people globally building equipment for drilling and downhole tools. And we put in supply chains for them to support their manufacturing operations on a global basis.
Got it. Interesting. And I love this, the follow the customer, right? If I see the customer migrating, I go with them or I don't, right? I remember I was in the paper and pulp industry. And initially that was kind of a Southern pine-based paper industry, and it all moved offshore. And so if you were in the equipment business, if you went offshore, you had no business left. So that exactly the same thing. So you would procure steel, generally fairly sophisticated steel, like fairly complex, high temperature, sour service, like acids and stuff like that. Inventory it and bring it to them to size, to shape, and then they'd process it from there mostly. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So what was different? Like what was the competitive advantage compared to the transactional companies that could do exactly what you could do? They could buy and they could sell, but what made what you did different? Was there an engineering element? What were the pieces that made that business different?
Well, I guess back to the partnering idea.
Yeah.
We actually convinced customers to kind of let us behind the curtain, talk to them about their forecast, their bill of materials, and then tried to rationalize, because every part was designed kind of as a unique part with its own unique raw material. And so what we tried to do was rationalize and consolidate their spend into a smaller number of, if you will, raw material SKUs.
Got it.
And then we would consolidate that demand over multiple customers and try to drive everything to a consistent supply chain inventory.
Right.
And so we were able to by doing that, and with the scale that we had, we were able to look at various customer demand points by region, and then work with the mills and the suppliers to bring in a higher volume. There were minimum order quantities. There were certain specs. Right. We rationalized the spec so that the spec would address the most critical application, and it could be used in the less critical applications. And so. And then we also would, as a result of that, we were able to give the customer value by lowering their individual transactional costs. Got it.
And did that translate into loyalty? I mean, you basically helped them engineer their product, engineer a supply chain, rationalize their inventory. Did that translate into, and then obviously the aggregation of volume, which dropped their purchase price a bit? I mean, obviously you kept some margin for yourself, but did that translate into loyalty? Because you're trying to move from transactional to relational. Did it work? Or did they say, gee, thanks for all the help, now let's talk about your price?
Yeah, that's a great question. It worked for a while.
Yeah.
Competitors started catching up. And the business, as you see now, even the oil industry cycles pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
And it goes from a period of oversupply to undersupply fairly quickly. And so in times when they were having trouble getting material, there was a lot of loyalty. In times where there was a business downturn, it was, what'd you do for me lately? What's your price? And I think the other part that we realized is we were bringing new ideas to a lot of the suppliers, and the suppliers were kind of agnostic as to who they sold to. And so there really was kind of a diminishing loyalty on both the supplier and the customer side, depending on where we were in the cycle. And so we were able to preserve a fairly good, I guess, moat to the competition for a period of time, and then we weren't. And as it cycled, when it went down, it was a pretty swift decline, and they still needed the material, but we'd lose pricing power. And so it was very challenging in a down cycle.
Right. And there were a limited number of both mills and customers. So if you look at a Porter's 5 force, your negotiating power on either side was pretty crummy, unfortunately.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Let's go over to the capital structure for a minute, because so this is fairly expensive stuff. It's not gold, but it's not dirt, right? And you're holding a lot of inventory for these people. So talk to me about how you financed all of that inventory, because it feels like a pretty capital intensive business to me.
Yeah, and that's right. I guess the first thing is when we did the acquisitions.
Right. Well, there's more capital, right?
There's more capital. We financed it primarily with debt because we could. With the idea, after we got things kind of rationalized, we got the synergies out of the business, we would delever by bringing in a partner to take some of the debt out. Unfortunately, we got caught through one of the downturns, and our ability to do that got extended. And then at the same time, as you mentioned, when you're aggregating demand and you've got multiple geographic points that you have to put inventory down, the inventory requirement is really, really high. Just to give you an idea, when we were maxed out doing, call it $450 million in revenue, we were carrying over $100 million of raw material inventory, which is fine. And when things are good, it is not so great when when oil prices drop, as they did on us a couple of times, from the hundreds back down into the 30s and low 40s.
Right.
And it happens really quick, and demand falls off really quick. It's interesting because you see kind of what's going on in the market right now. Obviously, oil prices are up, but you look at the service companies and the oil field equipment manufacturers, and they're still having issues around getting equipment, getting things to supply the oil companies. You get all this talk about why don't the oil companies just turn the spigot on and produce more oil? It doesn't work that way. Everything's got to ramp up. There's a huge supply chain requirement in place, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I guess the other part of it is there's a lot of capital that has to be deployed, and people need to have a comfort level that it's safe to deploy it, and the industry is going to continue to be supported over an investment time. So,
right. Yeah, this is where the regulatory environment is really critical to the investment decision, right? And if it's uncertain,
correct.
Yeah. Let's carry on with the capital conversation for a minute, though. So you brought in partners, was that debt and then later equity, and obviously it's a cyclical business, so you hit a downturn. How did your equity partners or your debt partners react, and what did that look like? And the reason why I want to go down this path, Dave, is there's some learning here, I think, for people about what can happen good, what can happen bad in that, and maybe what you want to do before that to protect it. So that's sort of where I'm heading with this line of questioning. So what happened when the cycle happened, which is normal?
Yeah. So I think the first cycle, after we finished the acquisitions, I think in our lending syndicate, we probably had 16 participants.
Wow.
All of them in different parts of the capital structure, both in terms of senior debt and leverage finance and sub debt and everything else. Obviously, when we hit a downturn before we could refinance, it was a miserable time, as you can imagine. Everybody knew and knows that the industry will come back because it does cycle, but that doesn't keep you from the shorter term pain and some of the panic in the streets when all of a sudden you're not able to service the debt.
Right.
And so there was a huge period in that time where we had a lot of conversations with our capital providers and said, this too shall pass. It's a good business with really good people and a really good model going through a really bad industry period. And the good news is we were fortunate enough, and I think the story was compelling enough that we were able to restructure some things and get them to sit on the sidelines and wait for the business to recover.
Right.
And so that was lesson one.
That was the debt providers you were able to restructure.
That was the debt providers.
You may have been in the enviable position. There's a joke that goes, if you owe the bank $1 million and you can't pay it back, you got a problem. But if you owe them $100 million and you can't pay it back, they got a problem. You might have been in that position where they didn't really have a lot of choices.
There's no doubt. I mean, at some point, if you fall out of a tree, you're dead, whether it was 30 feet or 150, right?
Right.
And so I think there was a lot of that. And I guess the other part of it, not that misery loves company, but they were in other deals going through similar things. And so it wasn't something where they could really point at us saying, there's something about your company. It was more like there's something about the industry. I think the lesson from that particular, we should have moved quicker when the business was, rather than trying to optimize the synergies and really take full advantage. We probably, looking back, and hindsight's perfect, as you know, but looking back, we should have been quicker on the recapitalization and brought in and delevered the balance sheet faster than we did. As we recovered, and came out of that, the business recovered again. We got back up to, as we figured, and this was probably within a less than 18-month period of time. Business recovered. We got back up to over 400 million. Profitability was good. And so we went through a process where we brought in a private equity sponsor to take out the debt holders. We had some warrants. We got rid of all of that, cleaned up the capital structure, and then got set for the ride on the upcycle that we saw, that we were in, and saw that would continue to develop.
It's almost like you should have said, hey, I'm bringing you in on an upcycle. There's going to be a down cycle before there's another upcycle. So just, if you're not ready for that, you're not going to be real happy here, right? Because that's kind of what happened. You went into the down cycle and their heads exploded. They just got crazy.
Yeah, that's true. When we brought in the equity provider, one of our criteria was somebody that understood the industry. Somebody that understood that it does cycle, that prices go up, prices go down, and that they understood that there was going to be a period of time where things weren't always going to be as good as they were. I think the learning from that is, yes, they understand, but they still have to do what they have to do, which means it got, if we hit another down cycle with the equity partners, and while they understood it, they still had to do the things that they needed to do to take care of their investors, and follow their playbook, if you will, on what you do when the business falls off.
Make sure it's like a consulting engagement, right? You see this amazing partner and you never see that person again after you say yes. Make sure that's the individual who's going to be on your board, right? The second is put the prenup in place when you do the marriage. I thought that was really good. And when you're doing a recap, get the money off the table versus letting it ride. Let as little ride as you can get away with letting ride, and get the money off the table, and just it's sort of like, you may not have called the top, but it was good enough that it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as entrepreneurs, I think to start a business and grow a business, you have to be somewhat of an eternal optimist.
Yeah.
And I think learning that lesson, I'm certainly a lot less of an optimist than I was. And I think it's an expensive lesson, obviously, but I think it lets you take a more pragmatic view of your company, how you want to manage it, how you want to capitalize it, and that optimization and maximization is a great concept, but it's not necessarily the best route in a lot of cases. Good enough's good enough.
Yeah.
And I think that was another thing that I learned, as we kind of traveled through this journey, if you will.
If you say the fatal flaw in this business is its capital intensity, could it have ever been redesigned as a service business where the customers provide the capital for their own product? They got a lower cost of capital than you anyway, so why not? And you go, look, the service I'm going to provide is, rationalization, design, inventory management, cutting the size, and just pay me. It's a lot. And it's not a $400 million business. It's a $40 million business, but it's probably got way higher margins. Is there any scope that could have been an option, or is that crazy talk?
I think we tried to pitch that to a couple of the customers that we had really good relationships with. I think, some of that's kind of driven by your competitors. And the fact is, we had competitors. We were probably, I think at our peak, we were probably the largest doing what we were doing. There were a couple of others that were maybe close, pretty close. So we had three major competitors. the other two, I know one of the other ones had they had an international owner that had thought about the cost of capital a lot different than a U.S. lender would. You can fill in the blanks of who that could be.
I love
and
that.
so
I love that country. The sushi is amazing.
exactly. And they were able to continue the model that we had all kind of had driven up to that point. And so trying to get a customer to change and deploy capital when you've got a competitor that's saying, well, if they don't want to do it, we will.
Yeah.
It was hard to get them to do it. And quite frankly, different industries have different rate of adoption, if you will. And I think until recently, the oil field industry, it wasn't like there was a whole lot of, in a lot of cases, a lot of creative thinking about new ways to do business. Things had worked forever the same way, and they continued to do business the same way, and they saw really no impetus to change what they were doing. I think it's changing now a little bit because I think they've had to, but until they were forced to look at doing things differently with a different model. And I think even some of the other competitors are thinking about capital differently than they were. And so I think a lot of this is understanding the competitors, how they're capitalized, because that's part of the competitive screening. You really need to understand that, what you're doing is going to be, sustainable, I think.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. No pain, no change, right? You need enough pain before you're really ready to change.
There's a lot of that.
And so the way this story kind of ended up was like a lot of private equity stories end, which is they said, we need a new CEO, right? And through a variety, it wasn't quite that linear. I know that, but net, you exited the business and probably didn't really want to be there anyway. So that's okay. So you bought into another business. So let's talk about that a little bit. So what did you go to and why did you do that? What's better about that business?
Well, I guess just to hit on your first point, yes, that is what happened.
Yeah. Because by the way, occupational hazard,
Because, and the other part of it is that's part of the playbook. When all else fails, then change management and see if they can do it different. I will say that there wasn't anything else to do. They brought in consultants to try to look at a different way to do it. They brought in a new CEO. As you said, I really didn't want to be there at that point, which is fine, but they still didn't change anything, and they didn't find any other levers to pull, which, you look back at that and you say, in one way, I wish they would have, because it would have been a different outcome for the company and the people that were in it. On the other hand, you look at it and you say, well, at least I didn't miss something. So
yeah, I'm not as dumb as they thought I was, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. And, when you go through something like that, there's going to be doubts, right? I mean, you build a business, but it's like, well, what did I miss, right?
Yeah.
And could I have done something different, or could have the team had thought of something different. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. So I took off about a year. We had my brother and I, who at the time that we both left the company, he was our general counsel and CFO. He jokes that he had all the jobs that I didn't want to do, which is somewhat true. Mm-hmm. And so we decided that we even through everything, we had kind of he's 9 years younger, and we had kind of a fun time, even though it was brutal. So we took about a year and looked for another business. And I think the criteria was try to find a business that would leverage some of our experience, whether it was supply chain or similar types of customers, similar models, solutions, value added, all of those things. And we looked and we found and I think the other thing, back to learnings, is a business that didn't just eat up capital like a hungry animal.
Yeah.
I think that was a key thing, because it's really hard, and something with margins and performance that looked like it was sustainable over time, or that you didn't hit a cycle. I mean, so there's a laundry list of things that came out to develop the criteria that were learnings from the prior business. And I don't know that we checked every box on the business that we found, but we got a lot of them checked. So we bought a company that is and here again, we're heading probably next year for somewhat of a slowdown. It's in building products. It's in architectural metals, which checked one box because it's in metals business. There's supply chain. There's interesting supply chain configurations. We work with a lot of suppliers globally. and there's a value add component. We've got a couple of product lines that we think they were really good, well developed product lines, but they were really selling kind of locally and regionally, and we saw a national opportunity for at least a couple of them, and a supply chain that we felt like we could do some things with to take it to the next level. And so there's an inventory component to it, but was a lot more just in time type of deliveries. We're ordering for projects rather than speculative. And so we're working with, major developers, major multi-unit retail operators, universities, restaurants, and there's all about the external panels and decorative panels on the exterior and interior buildings. So it's been interesting. It's been fun. Our inventory requirement is not near what it was. We've got the ability to scale the business nationally with internally, generated cash flow. And we think that there's just a huge opportunity for the product as we build out the supply chain, the sales and marketing. The company we found really had one salesman who was the entrepreneur that developed the product line. And he was older and he really didn't want to spend any more capital, both in terms of financial and his time, taking it to the next level. So it was ideally positioned for us to do kind of some of the same things that we had done in the prior business, but to take the learnings and hopefully not make the same mistakes, or to reconfigure and redesign the business in a way that kind of avoided a lot of the pitfalls we saw in the other business. So far it's been just a lot of fun. I say all the time, the most fun I had in the other business was kind of from 20 million to 120. Because you could still impact the business directly.
Yeah.
And it was a lot smaller, more focused team. You weren't in multiple geographies with, a lot of different levels of people and that kind of thing. And so this business is kind of in that, that 20 on the way to 100, we hope. And it's been just a huge amount of fun.
Nice.
And like you started with, if business is kind of your hobby, and you don't have a lot of other ones, finding this was really a gift. Because it's energizing every day, and it's we've got people there that were hungry to grow. They wanted to be empowered to make, decisions and to grow a business. And what's been fun is both the people that were there and the people we brought in have really grabbed hold of kind of our vision for the company and the things we want to do with it. And it's fun to go to work every day again, which is another gift.
Yeah. And, the things I like about this business compared to the other one is you're the manufacturer, not the distributor. So you moved one step closer to the customer in terms of value add. It's differentiated, the design, the color, the fixturing, it's very specific and which is why you end up at probably triple plus the margins that you were working with before. So, and the only thing I don't like is relatively low recurring. Well, two, it's in a cyclical business. So you're going to cycle, maybe not as hard as oil and gas, but it does cycle a bit. And long-term contractual arrangements you've got some, I know, with major brands, but it's not 100%, but it is higher than zero, which is higher than it used to be. So, a lot of directionally correct. Maybe one quick question, and then I'll finish on the final sort of projection for you. What businesses did you say no to and why? And by the way, this idea of buying businesses, I think as the boomers retire, which this guy, a lot of these little great lifestyle businesses with somebody with your vision can bring it to the next level are gonna exist. But I think your criteria was super important. So what did you say no to in looking for this one, and why? Give me a little bit on that.
Yeah, to your point, that's exactly the thesis that we were operating on. In fact, we structured our quote holding company in a way that if we found something else with a similar profile, we could roll it into the capital structure that we've got in place. I think to your point, we found a lot of businesses, and I think as boomers retire, and a lot of people aren't like us. They've got other hobbies and they want to go do them. And they don't have heirs that, or kids that want to take over the business. They're interested in other things. But there's a lot of those that are more lifestyle businesses, I think. They're good businesses, and a lot of them are larger than the one that we ended up with.
Yeah.
But they're really good in a market. They're really good with the customer base. But but I think in a lot of cases, we couldn't see a way to expand them past their existing market.
Mm.
And so that kind of we said, they're great businesses, but let's put them aside. I think the other thing we looked at, back to the earlier learning, is there was just, to really grow that certain businesses, it was going to take, doubling down on capital. And so we didn't really want to have to, unless it's our decision, we didn't really want to have to go outside for capital again. It's kind of like I rode that horse, and while it was fun, it bucked me off, and I'm not sure I want to get on another one.
Yep.
And so that was something else that we looked at that made us say no to a lot of things. I think, quite frankly, the teams in some of the other businesses, we got a really good operational team, really good technical, had a good engineering group. And in a lot of cases, in a lot of the businesses that we found, there wasn't the team in place. And we're going to another industry that, while we understand certain parts of it, it's new.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, it's the entrepreneur and maybe a couple of other partners, and they were driving a lot of it. And if they walk out the door, you lost a lot of value when they left. And because most of the time, what we saw is a lot of the entrepreneurs weren't interested in rounding out that team and really positioning it for what next after I leave. And we didn't really want to have to take that risk alongside, a risk of capital in a business that we, or an industry that we didn't really understand in our bones like we did the old one.
Mm.
And so that really, and I think the other thing is trying to get and find that deal flow, finding a company that really met our criteria. It's interesting and hard to find.
Mm.
And we looked at a lot. We probably looked at, I don't know, we probably had NDAs on 100+ businesses.
Wow.
And that's after, it really filtering through a bunch of other ones that we just knew from the teaser we weren't going to have an interest in. And there were probably a couple of other businesses that we might have moved forward with, but this one, it just checked so many boxes that we really got excited about the product line and the opportunity. And quite frankly, the leverage points for us relative to supply chain and the customers, contractors and architects, and the way that the industry is designed, kind of multi-tier selling. You got architects, contractors, and subcontractors. Was kind of similar to the oilfield services industry, where we had engineers, we had oil companies, and we had service companies, and then we had a whole infrastructure of machine shops that serviced everybody. And so the whole idea of the multiple sales levels and the impact points and the business model was very consistent. And quite frankly, the building industry has a similar culture to the oilfield industry, which is we need it when we need it, we need it quick, we need it on time, and service matters to us. And I think probably in building products that still is true, where I think it got diminished in the oil field as that industry has changed over time.
So my lack of planning does actually constitute an emergency on your part. I got it. Okay.
Yeah, and we're the last thing on the building for the most part, right? And so with everybody's got supply chains, and if the building's running late, our ability to perform and supply and anticipate that demand has been compelling. We've gotten a lot of orders by them switching from other suppliers to us because we're able to say yes and actually meet the commitment, which has been huge.
What, I love speed and responsiveness as a competitive advantage. If you're inside all of your competitors' delivery capability, you win a lot of business for just that reason. So let's go to our last question, and it's an oil question. So what's going to happen to oil? It's a two-part question. It's what's going to happen to the price of oil in the next 12 months? And what would you do differently if you were president for a day? On oil, not on anything else. I'm going to narrow the question.
I was going to say, let me pull out my 40-point list. I think there's a good chance oil. I think there's a good chance oil will. I think it will come down.
Even though the Saudis said they're going to cut production volume.
Yeah, but demand's going to fall off through the recession. I think it's oil's. Contrary to popular belief, it is supply and demand. And I think demand's going to, I mean, we're headed obviously next year, and I think we'll probably fare better than the rest of the world, obviously, but there's some pain coming next year. I think it's inevitable. Yeah. So I think demand will fall off. It's interesting. The OPEC announced their increase, but if you really look at what they're able to increase, they can talk all the millions of barrels they want to talk. They've only got so much they can really do, which is interesting to me. I think, what would I do different? I mean, they've got to quit vilifying the oil industry. At the end of the day, it's necessary now. It's going to be necessary for a long time as we transition. We've got the shale industry in the United States these aren't bad actors. These are major corporate citizens that are trying to do the right thing the right way. And at the end of the day, we produce oil cleaner and more effectively than a lot of these other areas around the world where they just don't care. Yeah. So saying the U.S. oil industry is bad is just it's bad. It's bad politics. We can increase, but we got to. The oil industry's got to have the feeling that one, they're wanted, that they're going to be supported, that the government's not trying to take away the industry. Because capital's not going to flow to the industry till it's safe to flow, and encouraged to flow. And this whole holding up of leases and pipelines, it's all politics. And this idea of the president going to bad actors, whether it's Venezuela or players in the Middle East, and on his knees begging for oil, it hurts our country in so many ways. It just, you look at it, and while there were deniers probably on climate, I think yes, we need to transition, but let's do it in a sensible way with a plan. It's not a switch we can flip. Yeah. It's just not going to happen.
Cool.
I've got another hour on that, but
I that's why I'm stopping it right now. So, hey, Dave, this was great. I mean, I think there were a lot of great knowledge points, and from your learning and your experience, I think people could take away from this. It's been an interesting journey so far, and looking forward to carrying on the journey together. So,
well, thank you. And it wasn't said, but I don't know that there's a lot of challenges we've had over the last, I don't know, how long have I been in a group?
15 years. Yeah.
And not that you asked me for this, but I don't think I'd have gotten through a lot of it without the support of the group and the input and that kind of thing. So you didn't hire me to do a commercial, but I think the expertise and the different experiences and if nothing else, the support of people that have been through similar things it's been invaluable to me. So you thank me, but I'll thank you for the commitment, the friendship over the last 15 years.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a blast. I'm privileged to do it. So, all right, guys. Thanks everybody for joining us on the Lazy CEO podcast. We will see you next time. And thanks again.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.